When it comes to horror icons, we think of a few popular icons such as Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and a few others. But one of those killers that we don't commonly think of, because the movie was all the way back in 1974, was Leatherface. He is the main killer in the entire Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. And even though there have been 8 films of him and his family, he still is not as popular as a lot of popular icons we see in today's Halloween culture. Now, the other day, I rewatched the 1974 version, which is the classic original and the only one I prefer, because after watching all of the other 8 films, I can honestly say that I will take the original any day over any of the sequels. They have no continuity, their characters are way off, and Leatherface, even though he is pretty much the same in every single film, just doesn't feel like he was the character that he was supposed to be in the original film. Now, on to the plot to begin with. So, basically, this film starts out with a group of teenagers that go to Texas to see their grandfather's grave because they've heard it's been vandalized. After going there, they stumble upon this house, and whose house is it? Well, it's the Sawyer's family's house, and they are a group of outcasts that are basically cannibalistic murderers, and they happen to get entangled with these travelers. And eventually, as the popular setting goes for a horror film, every single teenager in a horror film is pretty stupid. And you guys should know this by now after seeing a couple of them. So, what happens? Well, they basically all die except for the one at the very end, which somehow manages to escape just by an inch. But, that's how they all go as far as plot intertwines. But since this is actually one of the first horror films to really hit the books in a history perspective, it does seem to be one of the best scary movies that you'll ever see. And the reason for this is because it's different, and the acting is a lot different because this was a low-budget film. They did not have enough money to work on a popular movie set, so they just had to do with what they had. And Tobe Hooper, who was the director during this, had to do whatever he could with the acting, the setting. In an interview with the dinner scene at the end, they were talking about how hard that scene was to film because it was an unair-conditioned house. Sorry about that. And they were sweating. They had to keep acting, take one take over and over again. And it was 100 degrees out in the middle of Texas, and it was the hardest scene to film. But they got through it, and I honestly have to say that is one of the best acting scenes I've seen in a film. The setting of that film is amazing. I cannot believe with the low budget they had, they did such a good job of isolating you in a setting where it feels abandoned. It's out in the middle of Texas and nowhere. And you run into these cannibalistic murderers who you've never seen before, but they just turn out to be this animal family, basically. And that's what I love about this movie, is that it feels so different from the horror icons that you know today, like Michael Myers. And don't get me wrong, I am not dissing Michael Myers here, or Freddy Krueger, or any of the other popular icons. I'm only saying that this is different because they had little to work with. The acting was great, though the struggles they had to go through. And this set the stereotype for future horror films, since this film was in 1974. So, you can obviously imagine that the audiences weren't really prepared for this film. There was a lot of reviews that called it brutal and graphic, and there was a lot of people that refused to show it or even stock it on their shelves when it came out, because it was pretty violent for back in that day. And even in today's standards, if you really think about it, it still is a pretty violent film. Now obviously it's not as violent as the sequels, but it's more of the disturbing factor in it, and that's what makes it such a horrifying classic. And I would even argue that this is probably one of my favorite horror films, because it even leaves me disturbed. And it's just, there's not much to say in that perspective. It's a great setting, it's great acting, and it's a great story. And I really enjoy the fear factor in this film. It's classic, and I really appreciate that Leatherface is kind of the first killer in a Halloween series to set up the books for future ones. Now, basically, the other day, this past week, I guess, they released the poster for the sequel film, which will be sometime next year. I'm not sure what to think of that. We'll see, especially after seeing all of the 8 terrible films, but we'll see how it goes. Although, I can only hope, since this is canon with the 1974 version, I can only hope that this will be a step up, and they'll actually learn from their mistakes, and that they'll know what they did wrong with the previous ones, and that they'll make corrections with this one. And so that's about it for my review of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. And what better way to end a review with this classic scene?